In 2006, four college friends vanished without a trace during what should have been the perfect graduation celebration in Yosemite National Park. Amanda Phillips, Ryan Torres, Jessica Kim, and Michael Chang had planned their backcountry adventure for months, mapping out trails and researching campsites with the meticulous attention to detail that had carried them through 4 years of engineering school. But 7 years later, when city engineers were upgrading Yosemite's aging drainage infrastructure, they made a discovery so horrifying that it would expose decades of corruption and cover-up within the National Park Service itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of June 15th, 2006, started like any other at the Valley Village store in Yosemite. Security cameras captured the four friends as they moved through the aisles, their graduation caps still visible in Amanda's backpack from the ceremony just 2 days earlier. They purchased camping supplies, trail mix, and enough water purification tablets for a week-long trek into the backcountry. Ryan Torres, the group's de facto leader and Amanda's boyfriend since sophomore year, checked items off a handwritten list, while Jessica Kim documented everything with her digital camera, a habit that had annoyed and endeared her to friends throughout college. Michael Chang, the quietest of the four, stood slightly apart from the group, studying topographical maps with the same intensity he had once applied to thermodynamics equations. He had been the one to suggest Yosemite for their celebration, having visited the park every summer with his family since childhood. His knowledge of the less-traveled trails had convinced the others that they could experience the park's true wilderness, away from the crowded valley floor where most tourists congregated. The store clerk, a seasonal employee named Derek Morrison, would later tell investigators that the group seemed excited but well prepared. They asked about current trail conditions and weather forecasts, displaying the kind of cautious planning that experienced hikers appreciated. Morrison remembered Amanda's infectious laugh and how she had joked about finally putting her outdoor recreation minor to good use. None of them seemed concerned about anything beyond the normal challenges of backcountry camping. Their planned route would take them along the mist trail before branching off onto lesser-known paths that Michael had researched extensively. They intended to establish base camp near a series of seasonal waterfalls, approximately 8 miles from the nearest marked trail. The location offered the solitude they craved while remaining within a reasonable distance of civilization should any emergencies arise. Their itinerary, filed with the Backcountry Permit Office, indicated they would return to the valley by June 22nd. Amanda Phillips had grown up in suburban Sacramento, the daughter of 2 teachers who had instilled in her a love of both learning and the outdoors. She had chosen environmental engineering specifically because it combined her analytical skills with her passion for conservation. Her professors remembered her as someone who asked probing questions about the intersection of human development and natural systems. She had already accepted a position with the California Department of Water Resources, scheduled to begin in August. Ryan Torres came from a military family, his father having served 3 tours overseas before settling into civilian life as a high school mathematics teacher. Ryan had inherited his father's methodical approach to problem-solving and his mother's easy charm with people. He had planned to propose to Amanda during their Yosemite trip, having carried the engagement ring in his backpack for the past month, waiting for the perfect moment among the granite peaks and cascading waterfalls. Jessica Kim was the group's documentarian, rarely seen without her camera since her freshman year. Journalism class had awakened her interest in visual storytelling. She had double majored in communications and environmental science, hoping to pursue a career in environmental journalism. Her portfolio included compelling photo essays about urban sprawl and water conservation that had earned recognition from several regional publications. She viewed the Yosemite trip as an opportunity to capture the kind of pristine wilderness that was becoming increasingly rare. Michael Chang had always been the most introspective member of their friendship, someone who processed experiences internally before sharing his thoughts. His mechanical engineering studies had taught him to approach problems systematically, breaking complex systems down into manageable components. He had spent countless hours researching their route, cross-referencing historical weather data with recent trail reports to ensure their safety. His detailed preparation had given the entire group confidence in their ambitious itinerary. The Backcountry Permit Office processed their application without incident. Park Ranger Thomas Kellerman, a 20-year veteran of the National Park Service, reviewed their proposed route and approved it with only minor suggestions about water sources and potential weather hazards. Kellerman's notes from that day, preserved in the park's filing system, indicated that the group appeared well-equipped and knowledgeable about wilderness safety protocols. What none of them knew was that their carefully planned adventure would intersect with something far more sinister than the natural dangers they had prepared for. The trails they intended to explore passed through territory that had been claimed by someone who viewed the park's remote areas as his personal domain, someone who had spent years perfecting methods of identifying and isolating vulnerable visitors. On the morning of June 16th, the four friends left the valley floor as planned, their packs loaded with supplies and their spirits high despite the early hour. Several other hikers encountered them during the first few miles of their journey, describing them as friendly and well-prepared. A family from Oregon remembered sharing trail information with them near the Vernal Fall footbridge, noting how Michael had consulted his maps before recommending alternative viewpoints. By afternoon, they had moved beyond the heavily trafficked portions of the trail system, entering the kind of wilderness that attracted serious backpackers and challenged even experienced hikers. The terrain became increasingly demanding, requiring careful navigation and constant attention to weather conditions. Cell phone coverage disappeared entirely, leaving them dependent on their own resources and preparation. Their first planned campsite was located near a seasonal creek that Michael had identified during his research. The location offered both water access and natural shelter from prevailing winds, while remaining far enough from established trails to provide the solitude they sought. According to their itinerary, they planned to spend 2 nights at this location before moving deeper into the backcountry. The initial search began on June 23rd, when the group failed to return to their designated pickup point. Park officials organized a systematic search that included ground teams, helicopter surveys, and consultation with local climbing guides familiar with the area. The operation expanded over the following days as it became clear that the four friends had not simply been delayed by weather or equipment problems. Search teams discovered their abandoned campsite on June 25th, 3 days after the group's planned return. The scene was deeply troubling to experienced search and rescue personnel. The friends' backpacks remained in their tent, along with their cell phones, cameras, and most of their remaining food supplies. Their hiking boots were arranged neatly outside the tent, as if they had simply decided to take a brief walk in their camp shoes. Detective Maria Santos from the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office took charge of the investigation, bringing 15 years of experience in missing persons cases to bear on the puzzling evidence. The abandoned campsite suggested that the group had not been struggling with equipment failures or navigation problems when they disappeared. Their careful organization of personal items indicated they had expected to return to their tent, ruling out theories about voluntary departure or emergency evacuation. The absence of the friends' hiking boots particularly troubled investigators. Experienced backpackers simply did not venture into Yosemite's rocky terrain without proper footwear, especially not as a group. The positioning of the boots suggested they had been removed deliberately, not discarded in panic or haste. This detail, combined with the undisturbed state of their valuable equipment, began to suggest that their disappearance might not have been accidental. Amanda's parents, Robert and Linda Phillips, drove to Yosemite as soon as they learned about the failed rendezvous. Robert, a high school English teacher, struggled to reconcile his daughter's careful planning with her apparent vanishing. Linda, who taught elementary school, found herself unable to eat or sleep as the search continued without results. They established a temporary residence in a Mariposa motel, refusing to leave the area while their daughter remained missing. The Torres family joined them within days, Ryan's military father immediately offering to coordinate civilian volunteers for the search effort. Colonel James Torres had dealt with missing personnel during his service overseas, but the uncertainty surrounding his son's fate in what should have been a safe environment proved more challenging than combat situations where threats were clearly identified. His wife, Sarah, channeled her anxiety into managing logistics for the growing search operation. Jessica Kim's parents flew in from Seattle, her father taking leave from his position as a software engineer, while her mother temporarily closed her small accounting practice. David Kim had always worried about his daughter's adventurous spirit, but he had trusted her judgment and preparation. Now he found himself second-guessing every decision that had led to this moment, wondering if he should have discouraged the trip or insisted on more detailed communication protocols. The Chang family's response reflected Michael's own methodical nature. His parents, both professors at UC Davis, approached the situation with academic rigor, researching search and rescue protocols while maintaining detailed records of every development. Dr. Susan Chang, a biology professor, used her scientific training to analyze the environmental factors that might have contributed to the group's disappearance. Her husband, Dr. James Chang, who taught mechanical engineering, focused on equipment and navigation possibilities. As the search entered its second week, the scope of the operation expanded to include specialized teams from across California. Cave rescue specialists explored the area's numerous limestone formations, while swift water rescue teams examined seasonal streams and hidden pools. The California Office of Emergency Services coordinated with federal agencies to provide additional resources and expertise. Park Ranger Thomas Kellerman, who had approved their backcountry permit, volunteered for extended shifts despite his scheduled days off. His familiarity with the terrain and his memory of the group's planned route made him invaluable to search coordinators. Kellerman's dedication to finding the missing friends impressed both their families and his colleagues, though some observers noted that his intense involvement seemed to go beyond normal professional commitment. The search teams discovered several false leads during their systematic coverage of the area. A torn piece of fabric found near a cliff face initially raised hopes before being identified as debris from an unrelated climbing accident months earlier. Footprints in dried mud led searchers on a 2-day track that ended at a popular fishing spot used by local residents. Each disappointment added to the growing sense that the four friends had somehow vanished completely from the wilderness they had planned to explore. Media attention intensified as the search continued without results. The story of 4 college graduates disappearing during their celebration trip resonated with viewers across the country. Television crews established semi-permanent positions in the valley, providing daily updates that kept the case in national headlines. The increased scrutiny brought additional resources, but also complicated the investigation, as reporters sought access to search areas and interviewed anyone connected to the case. Detective Santos found herself managing not only the investigation, but also the media pressure and family expectations. Her experience had taught her that missing persons cases in wilderness areas rarely ended well after the first week, but she continued to pursue every lead with the same intensity she had shown since the beginning. The absence of any physical evidence or witness sightings after the campsite discovery suggested that the group's fate would remain unknown without a significant breakthrough. The seasonal nature of Yosemite's weather patterns complicated the long-term search effort. As summer progressed into fall, the area's high-elevation locations became increasingly difficult to access. Search teams had to balance the urgency of finding the missing friends with the safety considerations that came with changing conditions. The approaching winter would effectively end ground-based search operations in many areas, creating additional pressure to find answers before the season changed. 3 months after the disappearance, the official search was suspended, though volunteer efforts continued on a smaller scale. The families refused to accept that their children had simply vanished, organizing private search teams and maintaining pressure on law enforcement to continue the investigation. They established a reward fund and hired private investigators, determined to find answers regardless of the official status of the case. The first anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention and a brief resumption of official search efforts. New volunteers joined the effort, including some who had been following the case from across the country. The families organized memorial services that doubled as awareness campaigns, hoping to generate new leads or information that might explain what had happened to their children. As years passed, the case remained active, but moved to the background of daily operations for park officials and law enforcement. The families continued their private efforts, meeting annually at the park to conduct volunteer searches and maintain public awareness. They developed expertise in wilderness search techniques that rivaled that of professional teams, driven by a determination that impressed even seasoned investigators. The missing friends became part of Yosemite's unofficial history, their story shared among park employees and regular visitors. Guidebooks began including brief mentions of the case, usually in sections devoted to wilderness safety and the importance of proper preparation. Their disappearance served as a cautionary tale, though one that offered no clear lessons about what precautions might have prevented their fate. Detective Santos retired from the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office in 2011, but she maintained personal files on the case and continued to review new information whenever it became available. Her replacement, Detective Kevin Harrison, inherited not only the official case files, but also the relationships with the families and their ongoing private investigation efforts. He approached the case with fresh eyes, while respecting the work that had been done over the previous years. The development of new search technologies offered periodic hope for breakthrough discoveries. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area revealed several previously unknown caves and geological formations, each of which required systematic exploration. Advanced GPS tracking allowed for more precise mapping of areas that had been searched previously, ensuring that no terrain was missed due to navigation errors or incomplete coverage. In 2012, the case gained unexpected attention when a popular podcast featured a detailed examination of the evidence and timeline. The program's hosts interviewed family members, search team leaders, and park officials, creating a comprehensive narrative that reached audiences who had never heard the story before. The increased exposure generated dozens of new tips and theories, though none produced the breakthrough that everyone hoped for. The 7th anniversary of the disappearance passed quietly, marked only by the family's annual memorial gathering and a brief mention in local media. The case had become part of the area's background, a tragedy that locals acknowledged but rarely discussed in detail. Park officials had implemented new safety protocols and communication requirements for backcountry permits, changes that honored the missing friends while attempting to prevent similar incidents. It was during this period of quiet persistence that the infrastructure maintenance project began. The National Park Service had secured federal funding to upgrade Yosemite's aging drainage systems, work that had been deferred for years due to budget constraints. The project involved systematic examination of underground infrastructure that had been installed decades earlier, much of it in locations that were rarely accessed by park personnel. The engineering crew working on the drainage upgrade was led by Mark Harrison, a civil engineer with extensive experience in complex infrastructure projects. His team included specialists in underground construction, environmental remediation, and historical preservation, reflecting the unique challenges of working within a national park. They had spent months preparing for the project, studying archival documents, and conducting preliminary surveys of the affected areas. On the morning of September 15, 2013, Harrison's crew was examining a section of the drainage system that ran beneath one of the park's service roads. The concrete tunnels had been constructed in the 1960s as part of a major infrastructure expansion, but maintenance records suggested they had rarely been inspected since installation. The team's work involved both structural assessment and environmental testing to ensure compliance with current safety standards. The tunnel system was larger and more complex than the engineering drawings had indicated. Previous work had apparently involved modifications and extensions that were not reflected in the official documentation. Harrison's team had to map the actual configuration as they proceeded, using ground-penetrating radar and other techniques to understand the full scope of the infrastructure they were examining. As they worked deeper into the tunnel system, the team encountered areas that showed signs of unauthorized access and modification. Tool marks on concrete surfaces suggested that someone had been working in the tunnels long after their original construction. The discovery of improvised electrical connections and ventilation modifications indicated that the tunnels had been used for purposes far beyond their original design intent. The team's environmental specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen, noted unusual chemical signatures in soil samples taken from the tunnel floors. Her analysis revealed traces of compounds that were not consistent with normal drainage system contaminants. The patterns suggested that organic materials had been present in the tunnels for extended periods, though the specific nature of these materials remained unclear from the preliminary testing. Mark Harrison made the decision to bring in additional specialists when his team's initial findings suggested that the tunnel system had been compromised by unauthorized activity. The complex modifications they had discovered indicated systematic long-term use by someone with considerable knowledge of the park's infrastructure and maintenance schedules. The project's scope expanded beyond simple drainage upgrades to include a comprehensive investigation of the tunnel system's condition and history. The investigation revealed that the tunnel modifications had been carried out over a period of years, possibly decades. The work showed a level of skill and planning that suggested extensive familiarity with concrete construction and underground systems. Whoever had made these changes had taken considerable care to conceal their activities from routine inspection and maintenance procedures. On September 22, 2013, exactly 7 years and 3 months after Amanda Phillips, Ryan Torres, Jessica Kim, and Michael Chang had vanished from their carefully planned campsite, Mark Harrison's engineering crew reached a section of the drainage tunnel that had been sealed off from the main system. The concrete barrier was not part of the original construction, but rather a later addition that had been designed to appear as if it belonged to the infrastructure's original design. Behind that barrier, in a chamber that had been excavated and reinforced with meticulous attention to detail, they found the 4 friends. Their remains were chained together in a configuration that spoke to prolonged captivity and systematic torture. The evidence surrounding them revealed the work of someone who had spent years perfecting techniques for isolating and controlling victims in the most remote corners of the park. The discovery sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and the National Park Service. Detective Harrison, who had inherited the case from his predecessor, found himself coordinating the largest criminal investigation in park history. The forensic evidence recovered from the chamber would eventually expose Thomas Kellerman, the same park ranger who had approved their backcountry permit and volunteered for extended search shifts, as the perpetrator of crimes that had been decades in the making. The investigation revealed that Kellerman had been using his position and knowledge of the park's infrastructure to identify and target isolated visitors since the early 1990s. The tunnel system had been his base of operations, expanded and modified over years of careful preparation. His victims had been chosen for their isolation and his ability to manipulate search efforts to avoid detection. For the families who had never stopped searching, the discovery provided the answers they had sought for 7 years, though the truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Their children had not died in an accident or become lost in the wilderness. They had been taken by someone who had sworn to protect the park and its visitors, someone who had used his authority and expertise to commit crimes that defied comprehension. The case would ultimately lead to widespread reforms in the National Park Service's personnel screening and oversight procedures. It exposed systemic failures that had allowed a predator to operate with impunity for decades. Most importantly, it brought closure to families who had refused to give up hope, even when that hope led to the most devastating truth imaginable.